Welcome, Bridge Builders, to another episode of the podcast. My name is Mitch. We are going to be starting from here on out doing a little bit more of a better introduction. If you're a new listener, you kind of get a feel of who we are and where we stand with our beliefs in the church and so forth, and activity levels, because everybody's interested, I guess. But anyway, Mitch, I started this podcast several years ago. I'm an atheist. Now I grew up in the church, but left it officially in 2023. But my faith crisis happened towards the end of 2021.
I'm Juliet. I'm a convert to the church, joined in 2004 at the age of 16. I would say my faith transition started in about 2013 and is still maybe wrapping up, so that's a long time. So I am on the records and haven't attended in several years.
I'm Ashton. I am currently attending. I could probably say I'm hyperactive at this point. I'm currently the Elders Quorum president in my ward. Born and raised in Utah. And yeah, this is what we're doing as bridge builders, is bridging some of these gaps and having discussions between active, non-active, and anywhere in between.
Yeah, so we're grateful for you for following along. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. If you're able to financially donate to the podcast, we really appreciate that, and those who have donated so far. And yeah, check us out on our social media pages as well. Instagram and TikTok is where we're most active, and we'll go from there. So today we have Colton Scott with us in studio. Welcome, Colton.
Thank you.
Colton, if you could just kind of give us a little bit of your background, like where you kind of sit with things and why you wanted to come on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. My name is Colton Scott. I'm born and raised in Utah as well. I joke that I'm the product of the Utah factory. I'm everything that I was meant to become. I was born in the church, born in the covenant. My grandparents are converts to the church. My parents were reconverted to the church after being out of the church for a while. So I grew up in a super strong, devout family, where, nightly scripture reading was like a big priority, weekly family home evening, going to church, of course, every Sunday, young men's, all those things. Super devout. And, I'd say as a young teenager, I was somewhat, spiritually inclined, where at the age of 13, I remember praying to know, is this church true? And really trying to know for myself at a very young age. And having those spiritual experiences where I felt like, yes, this is good. I felt something. And so I went forward with that. I went to two church schools. I went to LDS Business College before my mission, or now Ensign College. And then I went on my mission to Scotland and Ireland. Wonderful experiences there. One thing about me is I'm definitely a rule follower. I always have been. And so I was always the quote unquote, the good kid who followed the rules. And so I really thrived as a missionary, where you have a bunch of rules, and being obedient was something that was just, something I was going to do. And then I came home, I went to BYU. So I think about up until the time that I graduated from BYU in 2018, I was sort of in I joked, the church factory, right? Where everything is just being fed to me, how to be a good person in the church. And so finally getting out of BYU was the first time in my life where I was sort of on my own to figure out life for myself and think, who actually am I and what do I actually believe? So I'd say from 2018 to really 2023 was sort of that period of, Ashton, I've heard you talk before about the 4 stages of faith. I think it starts with simplicity, and then complexity, and then perplexity, and then harmony. So I'd say the first 24 years of my life, I was in that simplicity phase. Everything was simple. I knew who I was. I had my purpose laid out for me, and then it was sort of that from 2018 to 2023 is sort of maybe the complexity piece for me, where I realized, well, maybe life isn't quite as black and white as I've always thought it was, and maybe having more of an open mind about things. And to the point that in 2023, when my sister, she confided in me, she felt safe enough to confide in me. So I think I had I was open-minded enough that she felt safe to sort of come to me and say, hey, I'm leaving the church. And that was sort of maybe the, day one of entering that perplexity phase for me, was in I think it was May of 2023 or June of 2023. So, yeah, when she told that to me, I was like shocked. I was like, hey, we're a strong family. Like, we don't leave the church. Like, what are you doing? And thinking that maybe she was misguided. And so I asked her, I was like, well, what are some of the things that you read? And maybe I could help like clear some of this up. I would say like 80%, I just wanted to like help her. 20%, I was like, well, what did she read that maybe I haven't read, And so she sent me a bunch of stuff and was like, well, at first she didn't want to. She's like, I don't want to send you this stuff. I was like, no, really, like I can handle it. I've been on a mission. I've heard it all. So go ahead and send it to me. And so she sent me like the CES Letter and LDS Discussions and a few other things as well. And at first it didn't really like faze me. I was going through it. I was like, these are some like things I've never really thought about before. Good questions, but yeah, I don't really know. And it wasn't until my older brother sort of talked to me at one point, and he's like, have you gone through any of the stuff that Mandy sent us? Because he asked to.
Sure.
And I was like, a little bit. And he's like, I think that there's like something to us. And so at that point, I took it a lot more seriously, and I went deep for myself and just started a full-blown investigation. Or I consider myself an investigator for the first time in my life at that point. Full-blown investigation into the church. And I would say within a period of 6 to 12 months. So by May of 2024, about a year then, I realized that like my shelf was totally broken, and I don't believe in the church anymore, which was hard because I still love the church. I loved it then, and I still love it now. And there's so many things like, I was like, I don't want to leave the church. I like the church. I could recognize that it's caused a lot of harm in people's lives, and I don't like that. But at the same time, like it's who I am. It's my whole identity is this church, And so I didn't want to leave it, but I didn't want to leave it, but I no longer believed it. And so I've just, for the last couple of years now, I guess I've been navigating life as a PIMO, physically in, mentally out. Still clinging, I guess, clinging to the things that I want to, and pushing everything else that I don't want to out. And so I'm still pretty active in my ward, and up until, I still have callings, and I guess that's my story.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you for coming on this podcast and being willing to talk about this. I guess I'm just curious, and I think Ashton let me know about a conversation you guys had recently, but your local leadership kind of knows where you stand on things, family, I'm guessing as well.
As of recently, so I just moved a couple months ago, but I had told the last bishopric where I was at, and then I just the other day told my new bishopric where I'm at.
All right. And I heard you maybe had a good experience with that.
Yeah, it actually went really well.
Cool. You mind telling us a little bit how that conversation went? If you're comfortable.
No, for sure.
And maybe if I could jump in and maybe narrow in on the question a little bit too, could you tell us maybe with the previous bishopric and the current bishopric, positives, if there are any negatives, and maybe how it was a little different in a ward that you'd been in for a while versus a ward that you were new in? Yeah,
for sure. In my last ward, I would say it was very difficult because when I moved to that ward in 2020, I was, super active and totally believing in everything like that. And so it was while I was in that ward that everything unraveled as far as my belief, right? And I did not feel comfortable going up to, everybody and announcing. And that's the other thing is how do you announce to people that you no longer believe?
Right.
Not that you need to, but you kind of want to. You don't want to be lumped in with just I'm just part of the cookie cutter Mormon.
Yeah.
So that was always hard for me. Is how do you have these conversations naturally? And that's still hard for me. So it came up naturally though in my last ward because I was the finance clerk and the primary pianist at the same time. And number one, I didn't want to have two callings because I was like, man, I'm putting a lot of work into something that I don't even believe in, right? But I like the community piece. And I also just started to feel weird about I've stopped paying my tithing to the church. I still pay tithing to various charities and stuff. So I stopped paying tithing to the church, and I was I just feel weird being the one counting the money, the tithing and the fast offerings while I'm doing this. It just felt weird. And so eventually I was I just want to talk to the bishop and just let him know. So I asked for a meeting and just sort of said I'd like to be released from this calling. I'm still happy to do the primary piano playing because I like that part. It's the best calling in the church. But I just kind of feel weird doing this. And he's like, yeah, tell me why. And I just sort of told him I learned that the Book of Mormon is not true. Like, it's a good book, but it's not historical. And I gave him a few pieces of like why I don't believe anymore. And he really didn't say a whole lot, which is probably good. He just sort of like listened, and he's like, okay, yeah, we'll go ahead and release you then. That makes sense. He's like, you're welcome to stay if you want, but yeah, I understand, and I'll go ahead and release you. So I thought that was a pretty positive interaction. He didn't like come at me trying to, persuade me back. In fact, at the end of the conversation, he asked me if there's anything. He's like, if you ever have anything you think we can do better as a ward, I would like to hear it. And
Cool.
I was like, oh, that's really cool. So I was released from that, and I still continued to play the piano until we moved 2 months ago. In the new ward, the new bishop came to me just the other day and asked if I'd be willing to. He wanted to come to my house and extend a calling. I was like, okay, here's my chance. And so I just wrote a little text. I was like, just so you know, I think I worded it as, I've stopped believing in the church. At the same time, I still want to continue to come to things occasionally and still be active in the community because I like the community. And he's like, oh, perfect. I think this calling will be just right for you then. And it's activity days for the boys. So I was like, perfect. And my 9-year-old son will be in it too. So I was like, yeah, I can lead activity days as long as you're okay with me not making any I can make a spiritual lesson for the kids, but it's not going to be like spiritual about the church. It'll just be like spiritual in general things. Okay. So it was, I thought, a very positive experience. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
You have something?
Oh, I've got lots of things.
Well, then go ahead.
I always have a lot. Two kind of question pods. The first is, you mentioned your shelf breaking. That's obviously like a favorite metaphor amongst people who have left the church. Typically, when people are referring to their shelf breaking, it's because there have been things sitting on their shelf for a long time. And also, in reading the book Torn by Jeff Strong, one thing that he mentions is that most people have questions or doubts actually as children or as teenagers. Like people who end up leaving, those usually start like as children or as teenagers, but they usually statistically most frequently don't take the action of disaffiliating from the church until their 20s or 30s. And so my first question is, like, was there anything that had been on your shelf for a long time?
For sure. That's a great question. Yes, there were a number of things. I think one of the big ones was I always loved the Book of Mormon, but in the back of my mind, I always felt like this is kind of an incredible story, almost too incredible, right?
Incredible,
uncredible,
unbelievable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, I loved the stories, but it almost felt a little too just maybe I didn't have the words then to describe. Well, this was like a 19th century text telling a story, but that's kind of what I was feeling like as I would read it. But I still loved it, and I would read it all the time. So I totally just put that on the shelf. I'd say another one was, and this was right before sort of my sister came to me in 2023, was I think it was February of 2023 or around then that the SEC came against the church and had the $5 million penalty for their 13 shell company LLCs. And so that was a big one for me. I was like, oh shoot, like that's pretty bad.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, just I think Brigham Young was on my shelf for a while.
That's all I got to say, Brigham Young.
Why?
I think he's on a lot of people's shelves. But yeah, I had heard stuff about him on my mission, various teachings of his. And I was like, yeah, I can't defend that, but the church is still true.
Yeah.
So I would say those things. And then I guess LGBT issues as well. And for a while, that was not something that was on my shelf because growing up, I feel bad some of the ways that I would think back then. And I don't know when it was, at some point in my probably younger 20s, something flipped in my brain and I was like, no, I'm an ally. Like I want to be an ally for these people. And so that sort of went on my shelf as well.
Yeah.
The way the church has responded in the past.
Yeah. It's interesting how many things we can have on our shelf that we just kind of tolerate for so many years that can take up so much space and add so much weight that we're able to, for lack of a better word, ignore. And then when the quote unquote shelf breaks or like people go through whatever process, those things can begin to feel like inignorable. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It like can go from like, because I mean, it's like if the church is true and it's God's will, none of that matters, right? Like if the church is true and it's God's will to have 13 shell companies, that's hiding however many $100 million. Who cares? If the God of the universe endorses it, then like there's going to be a good reason for it. So
I would always say, as long as the Book of Mormon is true, then it doesn't matter, right? Like all these things, I would forgive so much, like polygamy. As long as the Book of Mormon is true, then I can, that must have been from God somehow, or whatever.
Yeah.
That's when the Book of Mormon wasn't true for me. Everything crumbled.
Yeah. A keystone.
Yeah.
Yes.
Down with the arch.
Yeah, for sure.
My second question is, well, it's kind of a two-part. The first part of it is, you mentioned harm that the church inflicts on people that you've become more cognizant of. Do you mind like telling us more about your thoughts there, like where you see the harm happening?
Yeah. It's funny because I have not experienced harm very much in the church, but I think the first one I just mentioned, LGBTQ issues, right? I think there's a lot of harm that's been done there. And then women, like the way women have been treated in the church has bothered me for a really long time. So I think those are the two big ones in my mind, the twin towers of sort of harm. And for women, for me, it's painful, like looking up on the stand. I think a lot of people say this, but looking up on the stand and just seeing only men sitting up there, like women should be up on the stand as well. And they have so much to add. So I think those two are like the big ones.
Yeah.
And then of course, like racial issues as well.
Yeah.
I see that as hopefully better now, but I'm sure it's not all the way.
Yeah, for sure. Do you feel, something that I've wrestled with personally is trying to decide if I feel like I can participate with the harm that the church has done and is doing, if I like can participate even if I don't believe. Because like, for example, I like trunk or treat sounds really fun, right? Like I'd love to like take my kids to like trunk or treat or like some of like the other activities or stuff and just like go and be just like in the community and like get to know people or whatever. But I just don't know if like I'm sort of like feeding the beast or like lending legitimacy to an institution that I think is harming people like pretty actively. And I think like still has this structure of not being able to question and where the church doesn't apologize, right? Because I feel like sometimes if you're critical of the church or you say like, oh, I don't want to be a part of it because they do bad things, people will be like, oh, well, every institution has done bad things, right? Which is true. Any institution that has lasted in this country that's like 60 years or older has like probably some history of like some pretty abject like racism and sexism. That is true, right? But like most institutions have apologized and made like active restitution and active acknowledgement, and don't have a culture where you're like not allowed to challenge or question things. And so I think that's like a really important and significant difference. But I still really want to go to trunk or treat because it does seem fun, and I think that there's benefit there and like benefit there for me. Yeah. So do you deal with that at all?
Totally. Yeah. I have so many thoughts on that. I think, like in my opinion, every person sort of has to, and then they're going to naturally do this, but think about like their tolerance level for like any organization. Like no organization is going to be a perfect fit for anybody. So you have to like determine what's your tolerance level for maybe whatever harm or negative experiences you'll have with that organization. So I don't fault anyone if their tolerance level is low based on prior harm that's been done to them or that they've observed from other people. Like I totally get it. And I totally understand why people just leave the church and never want to go back at all. In fact, there are some days that I want to do that too. And there are multiple reasons why I continue to stay, both internal and also external as well, with like my wife and my kids and things. The point is, I think that, yeah, everybody has to determine what's right for them. For me, and I realize that this probably sounds like, well, yeah, you're just feeding the beast if you continue to go. But for me, it's like, I guess I have to compartmentalize things a little bit in my head and be like, well, going to this trunk or treat isn't going to cause me any harm right now or anybody else. But yeah, maybe it's feeding the beast. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know either.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a really hard one because it's so, are you in or are you out? And I think that and I would hope that the church is getting a little bit better, maybe not at the top, but at the mid-level, at the bottom level, getting better about wanting to be more progressive. And I think there are many members who would want to apologize or would want the brethren to apologize for things, but for whatever reason, they've chosen not to apologize for things. And I think that does hurt a lot of people for sure. So I wish they would. Yeah, I don't know. That's a really good question.
Yeah. That's interesting. Just like there's probably a lot of members that do wish the church would apologize, or who they themselves do feel apologetic about it. And it's like, if you're going to trunk or treat, like you're not going to trunk or treat with like the institution, with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Like you're actually like going to the trunk or treat with these other human beings, right?
Your neighbors who happen to be members of the Church of Jesus Christ.
Yeah. And who also have all kinds, like there's probably a handful of people, at least at that trunk or treat, who maybe don't really believe either, and maybe aren't open about it, or maybe they are, or people who are apologetic. And there's lots of opportunity there, like to have connection. So maybe I don't know, maybe that connection like outweighs the feeding of the beast, or maybe the feeding of the beast is just like something I have in my head. I also think that, the church is, I don't know, it's hard. I don't know if maybe we're getting to a point of being more inclusive where there's like more than one way to Mormon, and like people can really be comfortable there, not completely falling in line. I think that there's still just like a lot of policies and teachings and a lot of sorting of people, a lot of sorting that happens that makes it really hard.
Yeah. I feel like we're kind of in a transition phase in the culture of the church, maybe, where we're in this awkward teenage years of having the internet for 20, 30 years or whatever. And, according to Jeff Strong, 40% of members in the last 20 years in the United States have stepped away. So this is happening, and how are we dealing with it? So we're trying to figure that out, and it's disconnect between the top and the bottom, like you said. And so I do see improvement in general, but it's also, is it fast enough? I don't know.
Kind of takes us back to when we had Patrick Mason on, and just the spectrum between immediatist and gradualist, and the changes that can come, the positive progress that can come to an institution. We're feeling some of the immediate angst, I guess you could say, but maybe Mitch is kind of pointing out, hopefully, some of the gradual progress being made, right?
Yeah.
I do want to, before we move on to something else, I want to talk just from my perspective as just a local leader of apologies, because I've been in situations and interactions where I need, as a leader, to give an apology for something that I've done, and then there are other times where, as a leader, someone's demanding an apology from someone in the past, and it's like, well, this isn't what I've done. And so just to kind of explain some of my internal struggle, just probably as a human, that it's like, I don't want to have to apologize for someone else's mistakes, because I didn't make that choice. I inherited that position, of choices that people have made in the past. And I wonder if there's some level of that as human people, like not wanting to apologize for someone else's mistakes. But at the same time, if we fill a position, I feel like the role of that position is to apologize for the previous mistakes of someone who held that position. And I think, maybe not publicly, but more like on an internal level, and maybe like in a conversation like what we're having, I can say, hey, I didn't make that choice, but one of my predecessors did. And what I can do in this position that is my responsibility right now, I can apologize for those actions or those statements or policies that have been made in the past, so that progress can be made. Because for those that experience those things firsthand, or experience by inheritance the the results of those things of the past. It's just a way that it can be acknowledged and addressed, and to work through those mistakes and those faults that have happened in the past. So I hope that makes sense. That's kind of how I feel, being in that position, feeling that responsibility of those behind me in the past, maybe those ahead of me in the future, and like, well, what about the mistakes that I make that someone else feels like they need to correct? But they also feel like this loyalty to me as a person or as the position, like, well, I don't want to be disloyal. I don't want to put a stain on the name of Ashton because I care about Ashton or whatever the motivations are. With that responsibility, there comes this opportunity that allows for that growth and that progressive change to happen.
I do think the tone at the top matters a lot too. Obviously, in like in corporate America, we hear tone at the top a lot. It's in the church too, because the church is a big organization and very corporate as well. And when we have somebody like President Oaks, who, you know, has made these statements about the church is not in the business of giving an apology, seems to be somewhat, you know, litigation happy. It's kind of hard, but I think that, you know, when the day comes that there are other people leading the church, I think that the tone at the top may soften a little bit in that way too. At least I would hope so.
Yeah, I think it's probably going to have to for the sake of survival.
Mm-hmm. Agree. I relate a lot with what you were saying. For going back to Brigham Young, he's my fourth great grandfather.
Oh, sorry.
And no, it's okay.
The beard is giving Brigham.
That's right.
Probably mine too, but I don't know.
I'm from his second wife, who he married like
Second
shortly
wife,
after his baptism. His first wife passed away. So
Oh yeah, so like his first like wife.
Yeah, so his son Brigham Young Jr. was like my third great grandfather, whatever.
Okay.
Anyway, but I like feel this like inherent responsibility of some reason to like apologize for like what he did, even though that's 200 years ago, you know. So anyway, I relate to that.
Sure.
And,
The last thing I would say, just to your question about like feeding the beast, is I think sometimes I'm selfish in my approach to the church, where I don't think about like I can't think about the bigger picture sometimes, and I have to just think about what's best for me right now and what's best for my family. And is going and meeting my neighbors at a trunk or treat going to be best for my family and for me? And if the answer is yes, then we're going to go, you know. Or if it's going to church on Sunday, or a lot of times I'll go to first hour and not to second hour just because I can't handle it. I know I could go and make comments and try to make it a better place. Sometimes I just can't do that for myself, so I'll go for a walk on second hour during second hour instead. I guess that's a little selfish of me, but it's also some self-preservation as well, I think.
Yeah,
makes sense. I had a question about, you know, this PIMO, physically and mentally out. Like, have you connected with, whether in your old ward or this new ward, people kind of in a similar position? I tried to make it work for like 2 weeks, but for other circumstances, I probably would have lasted longer if I didn't give this specific talk in church at that same time, and some of the repercussions. But after I gave this talk, I had like a dozen people come up to me and say like, hey, I'm kind of in a similar spot. So it's just kind of like this underground of like non-believers at church.
I've thought about this so much. Like, there's got to be so many people that we're not aware of that are going through it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, a couple months ago, I made a Facebook post, and I, for various reasons, I made this post, and I basically just asked, like, is there anybody out there who has gone through a faith transition? Just curious. I didn't say anything about where I'm at or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't share things like that on Facebook about myself. So I asked if there anybody, and I was surprised. I probably had 7 or 8 people reach out to me, be like, and one of which was from my prior ward, somebody I had no idea. They were super active and had a somewhat high profile calling, and they said that they're probably going to step away sometime soon, because they just can't quite handle it. And so that surprised me. I think there's only one person from my last ward. I don't know this new ward well enough yet to really know. But then just other friends that I have that I was like, oh, I had no idea that they had left the church or had these doubts or whatever. But I think that there is that network, and I want to find them, and I think that we are stronger together, but yeah, I don't know how to. I've thought about going to my new bishop and pitching like, hey, what if we did, and I can see why he would say no, but pitching like a second hour class where it's something along the lines of bring your doubts, bring your questions, and let's talk about it openly. I think that would benefit the church if people can go and openly discuss the things that they're struggling with. But I can see multiple reasons why that might not be a good idea too. Yeah. So.
No, there's been pockets in other parts of the country. Cody and Leah Young, does that name strike a chord to anyone? I want to say that.
Yeah, it's familiar, but it's familiar. The name's familiar.
I think I want to say they were like in Ohio or somewhere, Midwest, whatever. And they kind of had a similar situation. They created like a get-together group. I'm not sure if it was like organized through their ward or stake or whatever, but I think they were eventually excommunicated or something like that. Again, this was 6-7 years ago maybe, so things could have changed, but I don't know. It's dangerous territory if you want to stay in good graces with the institution to a degree.
Like, I feel like if they invited me to, like, if I was in a Sunday school class that was like, bring your doubts, I feel like if I'm, like, because I'm someone that probably has more information or like about church history than a lot of people, for example, and like some other church cultural issues, like, I don't think there's any way that my presence in that class would make anybody more like invested in the church. Yeah, that seems like it wouldn't be good for the church. As much as they say whatever, doubts are fine. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I guess that we were just okay. We were more comfortable with being cultural Mormons, that we had like more of a place,
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Can I ask?
That's something I was going to, I've thought about a lot, is can we get to the point where the culture is okay to be, because for a long time it's been very black or white. You're either in or you're out. In fact, there are all kinds of talks from church leaders saying you're either in or you're out, right? You can't be a fence sitter. Will that someday change where it's more acceptable culturally to be sort of, I don't believe in the church, but I still want to come to the church for social reasons? Yeah. As a result of that Facebook post, I did meet with somebody as well. He reached out to me and we had lunch, and he is that way in his ward and with his wife. His wife is sort of nuanced believing, and he doesn't believe at all. And he's super open about that at church, and he says it actually works out pretty well most of the time, and he's still active in his calling, but doesn't believe like in God at all, and is super open with it. So I thought that maybe that could start to gain some traction and be more acceptable.
Yeah. I also think that if we had, I feel like people who were non-believing or maybe very nuanced would be able to have a more spiritual experience at church if it wasn't so black and white. Like, if you could just talk about the stories in the Book of Mormon and what they might teach us, or what meaning we might see in them, or like what, or whatever and whatever. But we didn't have this focus on like, do we completely support the church 100%? Do we believe it's true 100%? Are we totally in or totally out? Because I think so often people feel like since they can't in good conscience be totally in, then that means that they're totally out, right? Whereas maybe like if like it was fine to not actually believe that the Book of Mormon is true, or like fine to not actually think that like the prophet in Salt Lake City should be able to tell you what to do, but like you can still come and talk and like have a spiritual experience. Like if people would have a more spiritual experience and be able to come to church and feel like they could participate in a way that for them feels wholehearted, and not feel like they need to go on a walk in the second hour, but feel really comfortable with who they are and where they are in every hour of church.
If I could share just a little quick thing with my current experience, I know personally a handful of men in the elders quorum that are in a similar situation, non-believing, but their partner and their kids are still there, and they value that community. But kind of a similar thing, like there are a couple, like if I ask them if they'd like to come to elders quorum because we're having like a women's panel, I know I've talked about that on the podcast in the past, or to come for a specific topic, and I ask them to come and I ask them to be a part of the lesson because I value their perspective, even with this non-believing perspective. In some ways, with a non-believing perspective, it almost brings more valuable insight from what I've seen because it moves beyond the simplistic black and white and into the complex diversity of thought.
Less primary answers, maybe.
Yeah, more adult, like real life things. Not, I wish this was true because it makes me feel good, but my life is kind of complex and in certain ways disrupted now. Can we be more supportive of each other and acknowledge that these things are happening instead of kind of everyone mutually indulging each other with our thoughts that everything's great. Like there's nothing that we need to work on, if that makes sense. So this isn't an uncommon thing. Like you're saying, you know that there are so many out there. I think that's true where I'm at as well. So just another anecdotal witness that that's the case. So
If all Elders Quorum presidents had been and never were like unto Ashton.
no, I don't accept, but I appreciate it.
Is that in Second Nephi? I'm just kidding. That's good.
I do. Yes, you could. Yeah, but
I heard the small gasp. Like, go ahead.
This is kind of like maybe jumping ahead or taking a jump in some direction, but how do you picture? I think that a lot of listeners now who have like stepped away from the church are going to be asking themselves, yeah, but what about when it's time for your child to get baptized? What about when you have a child who's getting married in the temple? What about when not even a child, just like someone whose temple wedding you want to go to? Like all of those things. Like where have you gotten to with that? Those kinds of things.
Those are some of the hardest questions for sure. And this came up last year because my oldest turned 8 last April, or like a year ago. And at the time, I still had a recommend. Like it was still, I had lost my belief, but it was still like active. And so I talked to that same bishop from my last ward and was like, "Are you okay with me baptizing him?" And because we gave him the choice. It was more important for my wife that he got baptized than it was for me. Mm-hmm. And we had a conversation with him like, "Do you want to be baptized?" And he's like, "Well, yeah, of course I do. Like, it's what my cousins are doing and my friends." And we're like, "Okay, but like, do you know what it means? Like, do you really want to be baptized? We want this to be your choice." And he's like, "Well, yeah, I want to," in his 8-year-old brain, right? He wants to be baptized. Yeah. So we're like, okay, well, we're not going to like stop him from being baptized just because I sort of don't believe in it anymore. And so, and I also didn't want like his grandpa, my dad or my father-in-law to baptize him. So I was like, I'm going to see if I can do it still. And my bishop was cool. He's like, "Yep, let's go ahead and have you do it." And so I did it. It was a little hard for me in the confirmation to say like by the power of the Melchizedek priesthood, because like I don't believe in the Melchizedek priesthood, but I do believe in the power of God still. So I was able to give a blessing, and it was all very much things that I still agree with and feel comfortable saying. And then my wife and I made sure that we gave the talks for his baptism because we wanted to we didn't want to preach anything we didn't believe or have anything preached that we don't believe. So we kept them short and sweet and said things that like we both still agreed with. And so we crossed that bridge. I think it's gonna be harder next time. Now I no longer have like an active recommend anymore. That's where it gets hard too, is like, yeah, weddings. And if my son wants to get married in the temple someday, I guess I can't be there for it. I think that's a huge cost. And yeah, I don't have a good answer. Those are the hardest considerations, I think, for the PIMO like lifestyle.
Yeah, for sure. That I've like when I sort of had this switch in my brain that was like, oh, actually, there's not a good reason to go to church anymore. It was I think I was 31 at the time, and I went to the family ward once to like see what it was like, and I was single. And at that point I had decided that I was not participating in any kind of worthiness interview anymore. Mm-hmm. I opted out of that. And I was like, okay, if I don't do these interviews, I'm not going to have a temple recommend. And then I assumed I would never have a teaching calling which is like what I've always had in like all my wards. And I always felt like my place in the church was that people saw me as somebody who was insightful and smart and worth listening to. And I was like, I'm never going to have a teaching calling. People are going to know that I like don't have a temple recommend, and nobody is going to care what I have to say anymore. And like, I don't have a place here anymore. And I think now, maybe knowing what I know now, I think there are a lot of people who are teaching lots of classes who maybe don't have temple recommends and maybe don't care to have a temple recommend. And so like, maybe I didn't really like have to leave, but yeah, just like feeling that I had a point, it's lost my head, but like feeling that tension of like, even if I am sort of comfortable hanging out here, like culturally and being in community, I think for a lot of people, it can come up against just like a practical, like, what is this actually going to mean? And we were talking about Jeff Strong's book, Torn, a lot because we love it. And I'm just kind of finishing it up on audiobook, but have any of you read it?
I actually purchased it. It's sitting on my nightstand.
Okay.
I plan to purchase it after your interview with him. It
I've
was so good.
thumbed through it. And that's,
Yeah, it's really, I do have my criticisms. But there are parts of it that I think are phenomenal. But towards the end, he talks about how when he and his wife are, spoiler alert, sorry. When he and his wife were being set apart as mission president and mission president's wife, I guess, by Elder Holland, they were at the church office building and they were getting up to confirm his wife. And they invited all the priesthood holders in the room, to get up and participate. And his son, Cale, by that point, I think had been out of the church for like a decade and was very much disaffiliated. And he just was kind of like sitting there in his seat while everyone else got up to do it. And then Elder Holland, like knowing what he knew about Cale, invited him to come and stand in the circle. And, just kind of like shares the story of like how meaningful this was, which I agree. Like, I'm glad that happened, right? I think that was important for all of them, and sort of gave the message of like whether or not I'm a priesthood holder, like you're still my mom and you're still important and I'm like still important to you. And so, and I guess part of what I'm saying is I think that like act of ritual was important for that whole family, even though he didn't technically believe in it, right? And I think a lot of things like you perhaps like baptizing your son, like the ritual is still like meaningful and like feels important, right? Like it still sounds like it felt important to you that you were the one to do it as opposed to like somebody else. But then we just run into like, well, if Elder Holland is allowed to make that exception for that family in that circumstance, is he the only one that's allowed to make that exception?
Sure.
That was my first thought, is almost some frustration. Like, that's wonderful that could happen for them, but what about everybody else?
Yeah.
Because those are hard. Like, it's hard because now I don't think I would go up and join most circles where the men are supposed to go up and join the circles. And I'm already dreading having to sit there and everyone have their assumptions about me, why I'm not going up there, and what about everybody else?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. But I feel like if there's a culture where like people are welcome in that circle, then it's like, then you could like, in my mind, like it wouldn't be so much of a big deal for you to go up there and just participate, if it like wasn't an expectation that you're of anyone, that you're all on board with everything. You could just like go do the thing that's like meaningful to your community and just be wherever you are internally, right? With you and God.
I had an experience where my wife's grandpa, he's in his 80s and something happened. I think he hadn't drunk enough water or something, and he like almost passed out. And we were at a park, and he asked me to give him a priesthood blessing. And this was still in the early days of like my deconstruction. I still had the recommend, and so I was totally comfortable giving him the blessing. Well, maybe not totally comfortable. It felt a little weird.
Yeah.
I was like, I'll still do this for him. He's like in his 80s. I'm never gonna like tell him my reasons for anything at this point. I'm sorry, but he's too old to like go through all that with him.
Especially while he's in a medical situation.
Yeah, let me tell you about Brigham Young.
Just like internally, that was really hard for me. But I, of course I did it. But I think going forward, like those will get harder and harder for me as well.
Yeah.
There's a lot of meaning tied, going back to like your temple recommend example, right? Like, I don't know, there's like a dozen questions or whatever, and they range anywhere from like, do you believe in God and Jesus Christ? Do you keep the law of chastity? Do you pay your tithing and so forth? And depending on your bishop, I guess, like if you answer no to one of those questions, that wouldn't get you the piece of paper. Whereas, for instance, as we were stepping away, like my wife had the questions asked to her, and like for the first 2 or 3 where it's like, do you believe in Joseph Smith? Do you believe in God, Jesus Christ, Holy Ghost? She just said, I don't know. Not yes or no, just kind of, I don't know. And at least for our bishop, that wasn't enough, kind of. And so even though she could answer yes to everything else in that interview, like if somebody knows, hey, you're not worthy, quote unquote, you don't have a temple recommend, what's the automatic assumption? Is like, oh, they cheated on their spouse. They had a beer. They did something where it's a judgment upon their character for something that is really not that deep, I guess. Which is unfortunate, but
Yeah.
Yeah, if we could maybe talk a little bit about beliefs and standards, maybe distinguish them, and for Colton, maybe just have your standards changed throughout this process?
I don't think so. No. I don't know. I think that's a good question. No, I think I'm the same person that I always was. I always told my wife, like, as I was in the very earliest days, and she's like, well, are you going to like leave the church and stuff? And I was like, well, no, like maybe, I don't know. Like I'll still be the same person. The only difference is maybe I won't wear garments and maybe I won't pay tithing to the church, you know?
Yeah.
I have no intention to like change my lifestyle at all and lose all my standards. No, like I'm the same person.
yeah.
Yeah. I love that response. I see Juliet wanting to say something, but just to kind of conclude
This is just the way my face is. It always looks like it wants to talk.
always has thoughts. Oh, that's great. Just as far as like for some people, not wearing garments and not paying tithing are so tied to salvation. So maybe some of our audience members might hear that and feel like, well, then his standards have changed. And that's kind of what I wanted to hone in on as far as standards. I don't even know how to put this exactly, but like Mitch mentioned character. Like, do you feel like your character has changed even though you may
For worse,
approach standards
for worse
differently?
or for better.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah, the thing that's coming to me is like, I make it sound easy now. 2 years ago, it wasn't easy, right? It was very difficult. In fact, the day I was like, okay, I'm not going to put on my garments today, right? I'm just going to put this t-shirt on. Like, it was a really weird feeling. And I sure felt like I was going to hell for that, right? And there are days where I'm like, yeah, like you feel like you're sinning because you're not paying tithing to the church or whatever, right? Or I've sampled coffee. I just don't enjoy, I don't think it's good. And so like, I'm not a big coffee drinker. Some of them can be good. If you add enough sugar, then it's good. But it's like,
Swigify it.
yeah, exactly. I'm a Utah boy.
More about preference than a standard.
Right, exactly. But it's like, there's like logically, it feels like, well, there's nothing wrong. Like this cup of this warm beverage that's generally pretty good for you, like how is that a sin? But then like emotionally and like in my heart, it's like, well, it feels like a big sin, you know?
Yeah.
And so I feel like the bad guy sometimes, yes. But like I have to like tell myself, well, no, like I've listened to, I was telling you earlier, Ashley Buckner's podcast. I don't know if any of you have heard of her.
Which podcast?
Ashley Buckner.
What's her podcast called?
She's changed the name. I forgot what the
Come
current
Back?
one is. No.
Oh, is she a therapist?
She's a therapist
And
in Cedar City.
okay, and she's ex-Mormon.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I don't know her podcast, but I know her on social media.
Oh, okay.
Ashley B Therapy.
Yep.
Okay.
I think that's her handle on
That's
social
her new
media.
name. Yes,
Okay.
yes,
Okay.
exactly. And that's something she talks a lot about is like, that cup of coffee. She talks a lot about your central nervous system. I'm not a medical guy, so those of you who know more about this, like your central nervous system, if you grew up your entire life thinking that a cup of coffee was going to keep you out of heaven, then yeah, thinking about drinking one is probably going to give you this like, what's that like?
Autonomic response.
That's good. Yes, thank you.
That's the word.
That's the
Sorry.
medical word for it.
And like, and it's hard to reprogram that, right? There are things you can do to try to reprogram that, but it's very difficult. So I still feel those things. Yes, sometimes I don't feel like that, like a good person, but I have to tell myself like, no, this is okay. And from my perspective, my standards really haven't changed. I still believe in being a good person and not hurting other people and all those same things. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that's quite where you're going.
Yeah,
with that,
absolutely. For sure.
I'm just going to say my standards have changed, maybe not a ton, but my standards as far as there are things that I used to think that God disapproved of that now I don't think. I mean, if God is real, I don't think he cares at all, right? And so my standards have definitely changed since leaving the church. I don't think that they've changed for the better or the worst. I think it's just a matter of preference. But I think that my moral compass has only been strengthened and grounded and become more mature since I have realized that it is deeply unethical to outsource your moral compass to another person or to another institution. And so I feel like that's something I take a lot more accountability for, which has kind of forced me into like maturity.
Yeah.
I resonate with that.
I do too,
for sure.
actually.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
You better.
We're kind of getting close to time here. I wanted, if someone is still listening to this, I'm just thinking, amongst the four of us, there's a variety of views on God and the church and topics, but in general, I would say we're a little bit more nuanced at the very least. And so someone might be kind of listening, thinking like, oh, these guys are just bashing on the church or whatever. And so I don't know if Colton, you want to start with like any, what am I trying to say? Basically, like that was never my intention with starting this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we've done that today, but like I could see how someone might perceive that.
Sure.
Because this might be a space where they haven't really explored too much. I know if I would have listened to something like this 10 years ago, I would have been like, flip it off halfway through, like I wasn't very interested. So if you are that person, thank you for being here. And do you have anything kind of say to that?
I would just say that like, I'm physically in for a reason, right? And it's because it's for me right now and for my family, it's still a good place. Like I said, there's harm that's there. Other people have experienced harm and I can see that, recognize that and validate that. But for me, like it's in Utah, at least, it's the best place to meet your neighbors and make friends out of your neighbors.
Yeah.
And so that's a big part of why I go is like, I want to know who my neighbors are. And it's a good thing for us to like work towards and be together in that way. And I still believe in God. And so, so I like that part of it. And there's so much that is good in the church. Like who I am today is a direct result of my entire upbringing in the church. Right. And so I recognize that. And there's so much that I do love about the church still. And a lot of the teachings that I hear at church, like as I sit there in the pew and like what they're talking about, 80% of it I agree with and I love it. I'm like, yes, I agree. I want my kids to hear this. This is great. Then there's the 20%. I'm like, plug your ears. I don't want you to hear this part, or maybe it's less than 20%. But like, I've thought about, do I just go find some other church? I think I've looked up, universalism. It's like, yeah, that kind of appeals to me too. But there's going to be probably 20% of things I hear there too that I'm not going to agree with. And so for me right now, it's a good place to meet my community. And there is so much that I love. And I'm very grateful for like my upbringing, even if I don't believe in the truth claims anymore.
That's great. Thank you for saying that. Yeah. For me, like starting this whole thing, the main reason why is because I think I did things that I regret stepping away from the church. And I feel like the way that I was treated in some ways, I didn't love either. So if anything, if this can help even like two people, one person, to have a better experience dealing with a loved one stepping away themselves and working with things, I don't hate the church today. I went through a bit of an angry phase, so to speak, and maybe sometimes I still get passionate about certain things, but it's my heritage, my culture, I think a lot of us resonate with that, and it's everywhere here in Utah, and I don't know, just want to extend a hand of fellowship to a degree and say like, hey, I see you, hope you see me, how can we build this bridge? So
yeah.
Any final thoughts?
Just if someone is hearing this, if it, do we church bash? I don't think we church bash. But we have criticisms. I have criticisms that I'm like not quiet about. And it's important to me not to be quiet about them because I love to talk. And I want people who don't believe to feel like they are reasonably represented here, right? And understood as much as we can over a podcast. Also, though, I think if you hear criticisms of the church and you take that as a personal criticism, then I would invite people to think about that, because me criticizing the church as an institution isn't me criticizing any individual person. And I think that like our podcast is about finding the human connection in spite of all of this disagreement and all of the noise, right? And so even if somebody does vehemently disagree with your theoretical position, like, can you still be kind to them as a human being and still seek understanding?
Yeah.
The end.
I just want to share just a little bit from my experience, because with Brian McLaren's 4 Stages of Faith, and I think I go through all 4 stages maybe on a weekly basis at times. But perplexity, I've definitely felt a lot of perplexity and complexity in the last few years. And part of, for me, what's like in the church and in Christianity in general, Jesus is like the ultimate example that we look towards to maybe measure our actions against, right? And it occurred to me, this has been a couple of years ago, but Jesus was in the Jewish, I don't know if it would even be considered a church, but the Jewish culture and the system, the institution, and he didn't leave. He stayed where he was, and some of the oppression and the things that were going on within that system, he called them out. They were his people. He stayed with his people. He loved his people. And in some similar ways, like I have some criticisms of my own, and I'm here, I'm staying because I love my people, and I'm one of my people, and maybe I can make a difference in some of that oppression that happens currently, and some of the oppression that's happened in the past, just the acknowledgement and the seeking to be a better part of that cumulative system as well. So it's complicated for me. I have a lot of complicated feelings, again, waffling back and forth between it seems so black and white sometimes, and then it's like, ooh, no, I'm still kind of in that simplistic stage. I need to maybe open up my mind to a few more perspectives and more maturity there. But once in a while I find harmony, I think, and that final stage that Brian McLaren talks about, and that's the hope, I think, for everybody, is finding some level of peace and balance and mutual respect with our fellow humans. So
Thank you.
yeah, for sure.
One last thing I was going to say is, if you feel like we were bashing on the church, I'd recommend you go back a couple episodes and listen to like our episode with Skylar, with Jeff Strong, with Tiana,
with Bailey.
Like, these are active believing members that we had on the podcast and so forth. And so we really try to get a balance of perspectives here and are really just trying to model that behavior. So if you're leaving a comment, please keep that in mind. And thank you again, Colton, so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you listening and coming in person.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Any last words from you?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Other than, it's hard. It's hard all around. So just have sympathy for each other, wherever you're, whichever side you're on.
Yeah. All right. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already, because that's important. And we will see you next time on another episode of Latter-day Bridge Builders. Thanks.
Bye.